Welcome to the Daily Slant. I'm your host, Josh Hayes, joined as always by my co-host, Renee Miller. The Daily Slant is powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. Start the season by winning $2 million here in Week 1 at DraftKings.com, America's favorite one-week fantasy football site. As always, you can find my co-host Renee Miller's work at profootballfocus.com along with ESPN and rotoworld.com, Rotoviz, and you can follow her on Twitter at Renee Miller01. You can also find me on Twitter at Josh Hayes FS. Renee, how was your weekend?
Great. It's been in the 90s here in upstate New York, so we had a nice holiday weekend.
Okay, so that's a little sweltering there for September.
Now that I'm not by the pool, it's sweltering, but
okay, very nice. I did make it out to one Labor Day pool party, so we have that in common. That was excellent. I'm also, gratified / bitter over my DraftKings MMA lineup. Are you at all an MMA person when it comes to daily fantasy?
No, I don't go that far. I had an awful PGA lineup on DraftKings this weekend that I stopped following like by Saturday morning. It was awful. But I had a better time playing PGA on draft day. So I don't even know the first thing about MMA.
Okay, well,
I watched it, but I don't know like what counts for scoring or who anybody is or.
Yeah, it's really simple. I won't spend too much because obviously this is, Pro Football Focus this time here, so we won't waste too much time. But basically, punches, kicks are all like 1 point, and takedowns and advancing movement. And then, you get 100 points if you finish them in the first round, 75 second round, and then so on. So if you knock them out or you hit a bunch of strikes and the quicker the finish, the more points you get. So I was 5 for 5 going into the main event. I hit my my big time underdog, Raquel Pennington. And I'm sitting there sweating. I'm like in 467th place. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I need the plus 400 underdog on the main event for the title to win. And I don't know if I'm going to win all the money or I'm just going to win. I think I win minimum $1,000, like minimum, but probably a lot more. So, and it's not close. I lose.
Oh.
But it was a heck of a sweat. It felt good.
Yeah.
I got home from the barbecue just in time to catch the main event, and I was like, I'm not going to look at my DraftKings account. I'm just going to watch this fight. And then when the fight started, I was like, okay, I have to know. I have to know if I'm live or not. So I was live, and I guess I put together pretty good lineups because with the main event loss, I still cashed, triple my money, and it's like,
nice.
no big deal. I'll take the $10 any day. But it's always fun to have like a sweat like that for PGA or MMA, and now we're going to have it for NFL DFS, and we're going to get into it right here. It's week 1. We are firing it up on all cylinders. Yeah, the hands in the air for sure. Roller coaster style, week 1. I love it. So we're going to talk about Yahoo quickly. They've done some nice things in terms of updating their app and their product. So we'll just highlight that really quick because it's DFS NFL news, and I think it's relevant for people who are going to be playing. And then we'll talk quickly about your thoughts on overlay, but we won't spend too much time on digging into all this. We'll cover a couple little bankroll scenarios that I think are going to apply to the DFS layman. So we'll try to get you into the right spot in terms of what you should do on shorter bankrolls for those of you who aren't the millionaire stock investors firing up 10 million lineups across every DFS site. And then we'll get into your fourth down article here available on Pro Football Focus. 4 downs DFS, the fourth down article in the Pro Football Focus fantasy section under the daily tab. And we'll quickly talk about some defense and some optimal flex plays, some of that we covered last week, but we want to make sure we round out all 4 downs and make sure you cover that series so you are completely ready to roll out your DFS lineups with the best process available, courtesy of our own Renee Miller. And then we're going to cover DFS lineups. We're going to do a lineup breakdown, and we're going to integrate the Twitter questions, which are basically lineup questions for various positions. And we'll debate different players. And Renee, we'll go over our favorite plays, some of the people that we're going to be taking a look at to roll in our daily fantasy lineups heading into week 1. So let's go ahead and get into it here right now. Yahoo did some nice things. A lot of complaints that came out when we sort of talked about this, I think on the last show, about how they were missing stuff. Different things were unplugged from their products. So they stepped up in a really nice way. Now you can check out ownership percentage on the app. You can look at scoring potential, which is nice. I don't even know if does DraftKings or FanDuel offer like total scoring opportunity? I think that's something that only Yahoo is doing. Am I correct in saying that?
Draft Day has it, but it's not fantastically accurate. But Draft Day does do kind of in-game updated score projections. I'm trying to think if it does it on the player level. I think it does it on the lineup level. So it'll give you we expect your lineup to score this amount, and that adjusts in real time as your games are going on.
Yeah, I think DraftKings has like in player, like projected scoring output once that lineup locks. So you could look per player on what that person was projected in their system. But maybe I don't know if that's similar, because obviously we haven't ran this. So I haven't played any MLB DFS as of late on Yahoo, so I don't know if that's available for baseball. But interesting to see how that works out for football. I would like to see like one whole number. Just make it simple for me as a DFS player. It's like, your lineup can score 220 points total projected here, optimally, or something like that. So I would love to see that. Time remaining graphs is something that's pretty standard there between FanDuel and DraftKings. I sort of like the pie chart over the little lot dine that, what I'm talking about, that FanDuel uses. That's, I don't know, maybe I'm nitpicking here, but it's a little bit more, I guess, difficult to sort of crack. The minute number is fine. I don't understand the whole, you get like a millimeter when like you're down to the 7 p.m. games. I don't know how anybody's supposed to understand it. The pie graph, I think, works a lot better, and it's a lot easier for users, especially new people, to sort of understand. And then they have lineup indicators in their My Contest tab, which is always nice. I've been sort of asking FanDuel and DraftKings, I was like, hey, can you just put don't make me go into my lineup and start editing stuff for me to see if a guy is active or not. Why can't you just on the lineup page just say, hey, all these guys are active? You don't need to go in there and start unplugging stuff or editing various lineups, especially when you have multiple lineups. If you could just see it all on one page, especially in the app, that would be perfect. Now, the next question that I had that was sort of brought to me in just like a quick small debate between your colleague and I, Joe Kaiser of ESPN. You know him quite well. He was thinking, he was predicting, and I think he's right in saying that it looks like there's going to be a fair amount. I mean, it's obviously early in the week still, but it looks like there's going to be a fair amount of overlay on Yahoo, which sort of brings us to the question, do you prioritize overlay? Is it important to you? How should DFS players look at this overall approaching their NFL season?
I'm pretty conservative when it comes to bankroll management and chasing overlay. The overlay on Yahoo looks like it could be really substantial, though, more than what we usually see. I mean, when people talk about there's overlay on Saturday for Sunday NFL contests in DraftKings, that overlay is going to disappear. Chasing that overlay, spending more than, and when I say chasing overlay, I mean spending more than you planned if you have a bankroll management strategy and you say, I'm going to spend $100 this week, and you've allotted how you're going to spend that $100, and then you see overlay and say, well, maybe just 50 more. That I call chasing overlay. And if you do that on a site like DraftKings, it's going to fill. It's going to fill. Then they're going to open another contest. It happens time and time again. But on Yahoo, they're really they have a long way to go to close the gap on their $1 million, their $10 million prize pool contest for this Sunday. So I would say at this stage in the game, if you haven't already locked yourself into certain, bankroll, if you haven't committed your bankroll already, then by all means take advantage of that overlay. But I'm not ever going to recommend, spending money that you weren't planning on just because, your odds are improved in a certain contest.
Right. Maybe if you could sort of set your bankroll and then reallocate funds, or wait to see if this is like a perfect week per chance. And just as a note too, DraftKings is historically been the most aggressive in terms of setting prize pool throughout the NFL season, and they threw caution to the wind in terms of overlay last year. They were dead set on paying $1 million every week. And they knew that it was actually becoming a crusher towards the end of the season when people were sort of fading out of the NFL DFS contest in the Millie Makers, and they tried to raise the buy-in. It didn't work. Then they made it right through a huge free roll and priced it back down and said, okay, we understand that we made some errors. But kudos to them for trying to set the bar at a high level, and I think they're going to be in a much better position this year. And DraftKings might still overlay too, by the way. I'm going to take a stab and say that they don't, but I do definitely think that Yahoo sitting at 10% right now with a game that just released last week is in a much tougher position in terms of overlay. So to Renee's point there, if you haven't already committed your bankroll and you're not in a position where you have to overcommit yet to join that, I'm definitely maybe going to take a look at throwing a few extra shares in Yahoo, because your expected ROI is going to be in a much better spot there. The prize pool obviously is not as enticing, but the cash point looks like yeah, absolutely. I take it back. They're all enticing. Everyone, I want to win them all. So obviously I won't win them all, but I think we definitely need to take a bigger look at Yahoo. And I don't mean to be overly critical about them, because we talk about them over and over, and I try to give them credit for rolling out a nice update here at the beginning here. But I sort of think they're going down a not recommended road, in my opinion, in terms of their marketing. If you see what they've been doing on Twitter, is they've been enlisting official Twitter accounts of NFL teams, like the @Lions or the @Houston Texans, and then having JJ Watt say, hey, you need a top defense. Here, you know what, make sure you use the Texans in week 1 on Yahoo. If you look at that segment of people who follow, let's say, the Texans on Twitter, okay, X% of them, let's say half, let's say less than half, or 60% of those, maybe they play fantasy football. Now, what percent of that is playing daily fantasy there? So you've sort of taken that, you thought you were targeting, 467,000 or 1 million people who follow that Twitter account or whoever, and then maybe 20-ish% of that may have a shot at actually be interested in playing daily fantasy on Yahoo. So it isn't the segment that you necessarily think it is. And I'm a little bit surprised that they haven't sort of taken a step back and look at stuff like what Stars Draft is doing, which is partnering up with Roto Grinders and taking a look at some of these industry leaders rather than relying on people with bigger numbers or their own Yahoo site to sort of promote their contests. Because if they would have went down the RG route and they would have talked to somebody like Dan Bach, for example, Dan would have laid it all out for them and said, hey, you guys are missing a lot of these pieces here, and this is like industry standard, and maybe they could have got down the right path sooner and they would have had a better promoted product. Just my 2 cents on the whole deal. So getting back to the whole bank.
I think Dan Strafford retweeted or tweeted in my timeline this morning that DraftKings spent more than any other company this week on advertising, which I thought was really impressive, a really impressive statement.
Yeah, you know what? And that's money going into ESPN's pockets too. So that's excellent. And I love the shift, by the way, that DraftKings has done in terms of the advertising. Don't you think that the new advertising that they're accompanying, that they've enlisted for the NFL season, is a much better promoted product this year?
Sure. I'm not a marketing expert.
You're like, well, I'm playing anyway. They already got me. So the marketing is useless on Renee. She's already in. It's not the target segment. Okay, so really quickly here, going back to the bankroll. So if we remember back to FSTA, which you and I both attended out there in New York over the summer, I believe FSTA said that the average user, now this is for the season, will spend $190 in their DFS lineups, and that was a marked increase from something like 67. I'm just roughly throwing numbers out, but I know the 190-ish is fairly accurate. So let's just throw a $200 bankroll on an average person who says, listen, I'm going to take the $200 that FanDuel is offering me. I'll take that whole match. Okay. How can this person effectively manage their bankroll knowing that they want to play the Millie Maker? Okay. What can they do to keep a bankroll alive, survive, and succeed for this NFL season?
Well, I think the way that I think about bankroll management is that you want your cash game profits to cover your GPP entries. So if and you want to play somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 10 to 20% of your bankroll in NFL every week. Maybe I think that's a reasonably conservative, sustainable plan. If you know what you're doing and you're planning for the long term. So I would say in that scenario, that person would probably want to only enter the Millie Maker maybe one time each week and put the rest of their, maybe put another $20 in 50-50s or head-to-heads at a lower dollar amount, enter 10 $2 contests or 4 $5 contests or something, in something where the cash rate is 50%, and hopefully do well enough to cash in the GPP as well. But you're far more likely to minimum cash the Millie Maker than to win $2 million. Right. So I think that's a sound plan for somebody that wants to play all season and doesn't have the luxury of entering, $500 worth of Millie Maker lineups every week.
I think that's an excellent plan. And to your point, as we've talked about on previous shows, on maybe this podcast and my own podcast for baseball, is once you're a new player, especially, definitely take advantage of the beginner games with your 50-50s and those sort of matchups there. Those are a great way to get into a good level of competition with everybody else. There's no pros in there. It really is for the beginners. And once you have some level of success, there are going to advance you to the normal games, but you should have got your feet wet in a sufficient fashion if you have moved on from those beginner games to sort of be ready for those that next level of matchups in your 50-50s, and you'll have a sort of a good flow of what lineup you're going to be using in your cash game lineups and how that's going to differentiate for your GPPs. So I like that plan. I think it's sustainable there, and we're going to do our best on our end to provide you with some of the best plays for GPPs and cash games to help you out as well. So you're getting a full level of support. We're your support system for DFS here throughout the NFL season here. So that's going to cover what we've got going into Yahoo and the bankroll management stuff. Now we're going to quickly talk about your fourth down article for 4 downs to DFS, appearing on profootballfocus.com under the fantasy tab in the daily section. And basically to recap that here, we're talking about how you shouldn't punt and the difference between not punting and making use out of these last couple spots here. I want to quickly focus, first of all, have you give a quick synopsis of the articles for those who haven't checked it out, to tease them and make sure they check that out on the site. And then we can sort of delve into the positions that you want to talk about the most related to this article.
Sure. So when you get to the fourth down article, if you've been following this series, we kind of started with a wide array of options available on first down and how you want to start, and who you start with really sets the tone for your lineup, and then how best to build around that cornerstone, whether it's a quarterback or a running back. And when you get to fourth down, you're left with maybe your flex position, maybe a tight end, your kicker if you're playing on FanDuel, and your defense. And what a lot of people do at this point is punt. What a lot of NFL teams do on fourth down is punt. And it just doesn't make sense. Those are positions in your roster that are going to count potentially just as much as or more than, your running back one or your wide receiver one, depending on how the games play out. So it pays to use the same type of analysis and strategy and data-driven, evidence-based approaches that you've used for all the other positions, even if some of us shake our heads and our fists at having to use a kicker at all. Put some thought into it. Try to use the kicker that's going to actually pay dividends for you, rather than just, whatever, I'll just use the kicker of my favorite team or the kicker of, that same as my defense or something, whatever.
Sure. I think that makes a lot of sense there. And I'm just going to quickly highlight my kicker strategy that I use in season-long leagues that applies, I think, to DFS most weeks, because I stream kickers the same way I stream defenses in season-long leagues. And the streaming option is essentially, we're streaming everybody in DFS on some level. You can wipe the entire slate clean and decide who you want to play. But I think if you take a look at a couple key things that you can do in terms of kickers, and it's not an exact science. There's obviously higher scoring kickers than others. But my personal preference, if I can ever choose, and you obviously can choose on FanDuel, I want a dome kicker versus an outdoor kicker whenever possible. And I don't want the top offense necessarily. Like, I don't want Green Bay or Denver for an example. I guess maybe a different case can be made for Vinatieri, but I don't necessarily want Vinatieri given his age, and I think he's lost a little bit of power in his leg. But a lot of those times when you take the top offense, Mason Crosby, you're getting an extra point. You're getting,
4 of them.
Yeah, exactly. You're gonna get 4 or 5 points, 4 or 5 extra points. They're not kicking a lot of field goals. They're punching it in for 6. So somebody who is a little bit more mid tier to me, like the Matt Bryant's. I think Costanzo in Arizona plays in the dome there. It's not a top option, but they're not. They're sort of middle of the pack. But you figure for them to kick a good number of field goals, and they're in a dome, and they're not facing a top defense. Those are the sort of criteria that I try to match up for my kickers for season long and for DFS. And generally speaking, I think those tend to score more than the Gostkowskis and the Crosbys, and to a lesser extent the Vinatieri's that people will sort of lean towards. I think people think that then I'm in on Andrew Luck this week, like you said. I want to use my quarterback because I know that they're going to go off there. I used Brandon McManus for way too long in my season-long leagues and got nothing but extra points for 5 weeks, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is my fault. I know better than this. And so I ended up dropping him for Matt Prater, who made a lot more sense because the Lions offense wasn't as prolific, but they were in a dome and he has a huge leg. And that's a guy who makes a lot more sense, I think, in terms of DFS.
Great. One of the other things that I've used is right along those same lines is to look at and use the matchup to find kickers that are facing defenses. I found 4 defenses that I wrote up in that article that over the past 2 years have allowed fewer than 50% touchdowns when their opponents are in the red zone. So those are great defenses to target for kickers. They are Buffalo, Cincinnati, St. Louis, and Baltimore.
Okay, Justin Tucker
are the 4 teams that have for 2 consecutive years stopped drives in the red zone on more than 50% of tries. So that's pretty impressive. And those, if your offense is facing one of those defenses, I think it does give a small edge to the kicker in terms of field goal probability.
I like that a lot. That's a great point there. So it's like sort of bend but don't break defenses.
Yeah,
that'll put you right in field goal range.
Right.
Absolutely. All right, so let's go ahead and get into defense there. I think we touched on it just a little bit there, and we can delve a little bit more related to your article here on Pro Football Focus here. What's your overall defensive approach in terms of DFS? And is there a time? For me, it's sort of bottom rung. I like to go top to bottom, depending on whether or not I'm prioritizing quarterback or running back, sort of related to your article there. And defense is maybe the ugly stepchild of DFS there, shall I say. What's your general approach, and do you ever decide to adopt your DFS and promote it to above foster children, so to speak?
I mean, yeah, your defense can have an honored position in the family roster. I look at giveaway takeaway ratio, and I think we did touch on this a little bit last week, but there are some surprising defenses that are very opportunistic. Philadelphia last year, the Cowboys last year. Cowboys, I think, were number 2 in takeaways last year, which you don't expect.
They were underpriced for a long time. Yes,
it's opportunistic. And they're maybe not great at limiting opponents' points. They're involved in a lot of high-scoring games, but those fantasy points matter a lot less than the interceptions and potential for touchdown returns. That's what you're playing for. I mean, when you're playing a defense for DFS, you're playing for touchdown returns, in my way of thinking. So you want to target turnover-prone offenses and opportunistic defenses, and in so much as you can find that huge ratio. Those are the defenses that I zero in on every week.
Yeah, so you're looking for defenses who are A, in a good matchup, B, have guys like good outside linebackers who can create sack potential, or corners who are prolific in terms of interceptions and who have a sort of a track record in terms of pick six. Like, did you take a look at, by the way, the PFF stats on Richard Sherman as a defensive back? Because maybe I'm just misreading this, because I'm obviously not the most versed person here in terms of Pro Football Focus and the signature stats, but it looked like he was middle of the pack-ish in terms of fantasy potential, and maybe that's where I'm just sort of cross-referencing or confusing the Richard Sherman, known as the number one corner in the game or top 3 corner in the game, with how opportunistic or fantasy relevant he is in terms of football stats. But I just would have figured him as a cornerback would have lend himself to a higher ranking among the defensive backs on Pro Football Focus in that stat area. Did you happen to catch that at all?
Not that one specifically, but there's a couple things about the grades on PFF. One is that the grades that PFF gives to individual players for each player for each game aren't perfectly aligned with their fantasy value. I think that's one. And second, the value in Richard Sherman as one of the top 3 corners in the game is that people don't throw at him. So he doesn't get thrown at as much, and that's his value. You know, if he's covering your best receiver and it takes that receiver out of the game, that doesn't necessarily show up in terms of interceptions and, batted balls and stuff like that. But it makes him a valuable part of the defense.
Right.
And he earns that reputation. But it might not necessarily come out in
the stats, right?
So
no, I that makes a lot of sense, and something I haven't necessarily considered too. Is probably I should probably look at and I think that's in a stat that you can actually look at too, like attempts thrown at.
Yeah, right, thrown at, and he probably ranks well in that in terms of being thrown at.
One of the lowest in terms of, I guess, tried against among corners. So something else to definitely approach there as well. So for me personally, I think unfortunately, I do want to admit that defense is probably the number 4 foster kid in my roster. But having said that, that doesn't mean that I'm punting or that I won't get into a good spot with a defense that I feel comfortable with, or that I won't change a position among tight end or flex or even a wide receiver spot if I really feel like I need to get one pricing tier up in order to, if I really feel like overall projection wise it makes a difference in my defense. Do you subscribe to the same thing, or is it just sort of bottom level priority for you?
No, it's absolutely not bottom level priority. And I think we touched on this too before, the idea that all the pieces have to work together and you shouldn't compromise or throw in the towel. And, if you do the research ahead of time and you come to the table saying, like, maybe we'll get to it, but I really like the Bengals and the Cardinals defenses this week, but I can't afford either one of them. But those are the 2 defenses that I really think have the potential to score 20 fantasy points. Then I will rework somewhere else in order to fit one of them in, instead of saying, oh well, maybe the Browns will be okay. They're playing the Jets. That's a low scoring game.
Right.
But the Browns aren't very opportunistic, and you don't get that many fantasy points for it being a low scoring game unless it's really a shutout. So, I'll completely rework in order to have an optimal piece at every position.
Right. So I think we're just both saying piece of the pie doesn't have to be last. And if you're drawing the line on a tier and where the Bengals are and they're 3,500 or whatever, and there's a significant drop off below that, then, they get promoted. Now it's the Bengals' birthday. They're adopted, and they're in there. So
at the table inside the house.
Yeah, they don't have. You're right. They're eating with mom and dad in the kitchen, not in the breakfast nook.
Not out in the cold.
Absolutely. So, and we're going to cover all of that and see how the pieces fit once we get into our lineups. And let's go ahead and do that now. I want to quickly ask, before we dig in position by position, are you a person, and I didn't pioneer this myself. I want to give credit to one of my co-hosts at RotoWire for our DFS podcast there, Benny Ricciardi, who put me on to getting into a few Thursday lineups. And I'm not a Thursday guy, really, just because I sort of feel like it's all day slate-ish, like baseball. But now I think there's some actual merit to it. Maybe not as much in week 1, but being able to take a look at ownership percentages once that game locks there. And particularly on a site like FanDuel, where there isn't, late swap, and sort of taking a look at the trends and maybe adjusting for Sunday. Is that something that you do as well?
Yeah, I do. Maybe not quite as rigorously and scientifically as some people do, but that's the only reason that I enter those all inclusive slates on Thursday. And in week one, you can make an argument for playing players in the Thursday night game, but on DraftKings, I usually use them as enter a lineup just as a placeholder, and I'll end up playing all Sunday players when we get more information. The one thing to note about doing that, though, is that you do have to enter a lineup by the time the Thursday game starts. Don't just reserve the game and not enter a lineup. I think DraftKings will not let you late swap a blank position if you don't ever enter a player. So don't think you're going to enter Thursday games, reserve them. You have to put at least a dummy lineup in order to late swap.
That's actually a great point there too as well. You know what? And it's sort of a catch-22 for me in week one because I really like Ben Roethlisberger this week, and I think actually with LeGarrette Blount suspended, the Patriots are in a good spot, and the total is huge. So there's a lot of great things to like about the Thursday game. And there's a couple of interesting lower tier plays there as well. So I kind of want to do what you do on DraftKings and get in there, but I really kind of want to see if Tom Brady is going to go revenge mode. And I know that's not a stat you can look up on Pro Football Focus. There's no revenge mode category, but I feel like they're in line. The total says they're in line for a big game. And, there's no defense to speak of in Pittsburgh from my perspective, based on what they've done in the offseason and what they've lost. And the similar scenario to in New England now with no Darrelle Revis, with Arthur Jones making his way to the Indianapolis Colts out there in free agency. And just some basically underwhelming options in my mind in their secondary, with the exception of McCourty. So I think there's prime opportunity for a shootout overall, but I do want to be a little bit more cautious with some of the plays I have and be able to wait till Sunday to see if there's some last minute adjustments that I want to make. So I think I might do a little bit of both. Fire up a Roethlisberger lineup or a Tom Brady lineup, and then get a couple more lineups in that I'm able to adjust on Sunday. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about it. Quarterback position, we'll start right at the top. It's most popular there. My first question for you is, after taking a look at who I wanted to roll in for this week, Matt Ryan is one of the more popular options, at least according to the Fantasy Labs Optimizer that is available on ProFootballFocus.com in the Fantasy Hub. Is he chalk to you? Because I don't want to necessarily use the top option, and I felt like maybe this is just a cash game play because the ownership level might be a little bit too high for GPPs. What's your thoughts on Matt Ryan to start?
Interesting. Matt, I never think of Matt Ryan as chalk. I think he goes so overlooked. And actually, he's one of the candidates for me to write up in a article I do on contrarian plays, just because I think he's in this weird place. He's in this weird tier where you can always pay a little bit more for somebody better, like Luck or Rodgers or Manning, or you can pay a little bit less for somebody with as much upside. So he's in this weird place where I think, he's just kind of this vanilla quarterback. He's always good. But is he ever really great? He's got those games behind him, but he's in a perfect position this week. I like him a lot.
Yeah.
In this high-scoring game against Philadelphia, he's going to get a lot of opportunities, and he's pretty accurate too. The Philly defense can create turnovers, but I think Matt Ryan's a little bit kind of above the level of player that they typically have taken advantage of.
Yeah, they've actually unplugged a couple spots on defense too. Kiko Alonso goes over to Buffalo there. They did sign Byron Maxwell to help shore up their secondary. But I just think even if they are a little bit opportunistic and Matt Ryan gets caught with a turnover or two, there's going to be such a high pace of play, on both sides of the ball. If you remember back to, eternity, I can never remember Atlanta being targeted as a running team, basically ever. Maybe Jamal Anderson. We can go back that far with Dirty Bird. Even then, I don't know. I think they were running run and shoot with Jamal Anderson. So I'm going to go with never as Atlanta Falcons as a running team. So you have that, and then you have Philadelphia with Chip Kelly, who has once again pledged to run more plays than have ever been run in an NFL season in history. And it looks like it's just prime opportunity overall. And I love the price right now on DraftKings, $7,500 for Matt Ryan, projected number 2 in the Fantasy Labs lineup optimizer. I'm not going to tell you who number one is because you got to go and subscribe. So make sure you check that out, and it's well worth it. Just all you just do is make a $10 deposit on DraftKings through the Pro Football Focus link there, and you'll see all these awesome plays in the optimizer there as well. So Matt Ryan for me is going to be somebody I'm anchoring my lineup with, and I think I'm going to get a good share of cash game and GPP lineups because he makes a lot of sense when you pair him with Julio Jones, and I'll be doing that. What about you? Who's going to be anchoring your lineup here this weekend?
Two that I really like a lot. I mean, based on all factors considered, are Tony Romo and Carson Palmer. I think they're both great mid-tier options that have either one. It wouldn't surprise me if either one of them finished as the top one or two quarterback on the week. Both playing in what should be high-paced, high-scoring games with. Especially in the case of Dallas, a pretty healthy array of weapons around them. John Brown, I know, is going to be a super popular play this week as Michael Floyd is not back yet. Larry Fitzgerald. I mean, I'm writing about a few of the older receivers in the league this week because even though they're old, the beginning of the season is when they're going to be at their best. We can presume if you buy the breakdown argument, the wear and tear argument, these are the weeks to use them, and there are a whole bunch that are relatively inexpensive. Larry Fitzgerald being one.
All right, so that's a good question to lead me into here. Are you playing the hookup with Fitz and rolling John Brown into your lineup? Do you just use John Brown? How do you approach that in terms of hookups if you're using Carson Palmer?
Some of both. How do I want to say that? Either. I'm comfortable with either. They're pretty similar salaries. I think on DraftKings or on FanDuel, Larry Fitzgerald might be a little bit more expensive than John Brown. I won't use both in the same lineup with Palmer, but I'm fine with either one.
Okay, so
you get the probably more receptions for Larry Fitzgerald, but bigger play possibilities with John Brown. He was really good on plays over 20 yards last year. I think he had a 0% drop rate on 9 out of 9 catchable passes thrown more than 20 yards his way. So they're both good things: big playability and multiple targets.
All right, sounds good to me. Both priced exactly at $6K on FanDuel, just as a point of reference there. I think if I'm on DraftKings, I would slightly prefer Brown over Larry Fitzgerald because of the yardage bonus there. So, and I think that we see. This is just my general perception, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I see Larry Fitzgerald as a more possession type guy with less down the field activity in this stage of his career, and John Brown as a much better home run type play, especially for GPPs. So, but I think the ownership percentage is going to be fairly high on John Brown given the discount that you're getting here in week 1. I wanted to quickly ask you about the other side of the ball there in Philly and Sam Bradford. I've heard a lot of people talk about Sam Bradford here in week 1 as a potential GPP option. To me, I don't necessarily trust him enough in cash games because I think there's just way too many more solid options out there that are available. So what's your approach on the new Philly quarterback starter for 2015?
I'm excited to watch him, but he won't be in any of my lineups in any sort of contest. I think he's going to be really high owned in GPPs. And like you, I want to see it before I trust him in cash games. Absolutely.
And that's going to lead us into a Philly Twitter question from Benny Ricciardi, of all people. So yes, DFS analysts have questions too. And he's on Twitter at BennyR11. He says, "Why am I the only one who loves DeMarco Murray this weekend?" So is he alone? I have to say I haven't really considered him for my lineups. I want to see how the three-headed monster shakes out personally. What's your take on DeMarco for week 1?
He made it into my August 6th article, my first down for PFF, as one of 2 running backs that I would consider building my lineup around. So I've liked him for a month now. And my enthusiasm really hasn't waned at all. And I love it that that maybe Benny and I are the only ones, because he's still DeMarco Murray. I think he's still going to get a ton of carries when you increase the number of plays that are being run. That goes for running too.
Sure.
And I think Ryan Matthews has some value as well as a really cheap running back too. But DeMarco Murray is a player I'm perfectly comfortable having as my wide receiver or my running back one.
Interesting. I am going to. I think I'm going to swing for the fence all the way at the top if I'm going to get into that tier there. And right there, I think if you wanted to, the way I would sort of draw the line is 8,400, for instance, on FanDuel with C.J. Anderson. I think that's the top tier there. And you have LaShawn McCoy, DeMarco Murray, 8,500. Then you have Lacey, Lynch, Hill, Forte, Charles, and Adrian Peterson right at the top. I'm predicting 475 yards for Adrian Peterson here in week 1 against a San Francisco defense that I follow football as much as anybody. I mean, there's people, obviously, I'm not Mike Clay, I'm not Jeff Radcliffe, but you tell me if you can name 5 defensive starters for week 1 in San Francisco. Can you?
No.
I can't. No.
I know I can.
They've
lost 475 yards.
Well, yeah. I'm just saying I'm all in on Adrian Peterson with, this is a player who plays with a chip on his shoulder. And you remember there was a lot of naysayers and doubters with him coming off the ACL tear there a couple seasons back here. And I think that given the matchup, the Monday night, the situation, the number of defensive impact players that have been unplugged out there in San Francisco, and the underwhelming offense that has really struggled in preseason for the San Francisco 49ers, it's like a perfect storm for Adrian Peterson to just go off there. Maybe it's not 475 yards. Maybe it's 474.
175 would be just fine.
Yeah, I'll take 175 with 2 touchdowns, and maybe he kicks an extra point or something like that. Either way, I'm predicting big things here, and I think that's San Francisco. If you've looked at the win total too in Vegas there, that should tell you something too. I'm not just on them because a bunch of people have left their defense. Vegas backs it up. I think they're. I want to say with that just as a stab in the dark, I think the win total was 6.5 or something over unders for this year. So a lot not to like in San Francisco, and I think it's going to be big time buffet there for Adrian Peterson there in week 1. So obviously you're paying up. You've got 9,200. You're going to have to make sacrifices elsewhere, and I want to talk about some of those sacrifices there. To me, one of my I guess contrarian plays is going to be here for week 1. I like Ryan Tannehill matched up against the Washington Redskins here in week 1. The question here is, I think the play right now has to be Jarvis Landry as the hookup, but the issue that I have, particularly on DraftKings, is because he ran so many short routes last year. He was just like a possession guy. He basically took Brian Hartline out of the lineup and ran all the same routes that Brian Hartline ran, the 15-yard ins, the outs, slants across the middle that don't have a lot of potential to break for a home run. And Tannehill was great at them, but also Tannehill had been knocked last season for not being able to hook up with Mike Wallace with the deep ball as much. So Jarvis Landry, that wasn't his role, and I don't know if his role is going to change. So, but having said that, Washington is so bad. 80%. Sorry, go ahead.
He caught like 80% of those, though, so I don't know why they would get away from that game plan entirely. He was very effective in that role.
Right, and he basically asserted himself as a clear number 1. So I just don't know if there's enough home run potential for me to love it, but I think I'm going to have to pair Jarvis Landry with Ryan Tannehill if you're using him in week 1. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, he's the clear number 1 option there, and that's the scenario that I like to target if I'm stacking quarterback and wide receiver.
All right, fair enough. I'm trying to come up with some sort of good hashtag for it, like Tanland, going to Tanland, or something like that. So I will have some shares of Ryan Tannehill against Washington. Hopefully Kirk Cousins coughs up the ball a ton and we can see some serious action. But Ryan Tannehill, I think, is highly underrated, and I think he's a player that gets priced out of the top 10 consistently, that on a number of occasions this year is going to play himself into top 6, 7, 5 for scoring here on various weeks, depending on the matchup there. Okay. So something to pay attention to. Interesting to see how Devontae Parker ends up affecting that role along with Rashard Matthews as well. But for me, I don't think I can trust anybody else besides Jarvis Landry here for week 1. All right, so we talked about some quarterbacks here. Let me just toss it over to you on the wide receiver spot here. What do you like here coming up for week 1?
Let me just mention one more, which is kind of an interesting value / tournament play, who's Tyrod Taylor. No one expected him to win the starting job when salaries were released, and he's minimum priced everywhere. And I expect he's also going to be a fairly popular GPP play. But even on Yahoo, he's ridiculously inexpensive. Right. And he led quarterbacks in rushing in the preseason, and didn't have such a bad completion percentage either, somewhere in the 60s, I think. So he could be a competent option against Indianapolis.
I like that, and I think as of today, Indianapolis has one cornerback that's currently down. So they may be down a starter at the cornerback position there as well. I'm obviously going to be pairing Tyrod Taylor, or T-Mobile, as the Buffalo announcers like to call him, with Sammy Watkins. So I will have some shares of that for some GPP action. I think that's a great way for you to have an absolutely loaded lineup with Watkins, who's priced outside the top 10 for wide receivers. And like you mentioned, the minimum price Tyrod Taylor. So I definitely like that there as well. I think one that's not being talked about that is in a similar fashion here is Marcus Mariota. And you can pick your poison. If you go by the coach speak and sort of the numbers there in preseason, I guess you can call Kendall Wright their de facto number 1. So if you want to pair Mariota with Kendall Wright there in week 1 against the Bucs, that's an option. I kind of want to just go all out if I'm using this, contrarian GPP play, and just go Mariota, Dorial, Beckham, Green. What do you say?
Well, I say, and I'm glad you asked about this one too, because I think it's maybe a general principle that I have that can apply to all these situations, is that I won't use Sammy Watkins or Kendall Wright or Dorial Green Beckham, because if I'm saving that much money on quarterback, those quarterbacks in that range are going to have a really big range of potential outcomes. There's a lot of ways it could go when you're spending $5,000 on a quarterback, and that I don't want to double down on that. Okay. So if those rookie quarterbacks have a terrible day, their receivers are all going to have terrible days too. And maybe the reason that you do that you want to spend $5,000 on quarterback is so that you can upgrade at other positions. So to me, you're not saving yourself by kind of doubling down on a very low probability outcome, which is that Tyrod Taylor throws 4 touchdowns to Sammy Watkins. Like, maybe Tyrod Taylor reaches value because he's so inexpensive and he rushes for a touchdown and he rushes for 50 yards and throws for 200 or 180. But if I can then get Julio Jones in that wide receiver spot because I've saved on Tyrod Taylor, that's more how I play a cheap quarterback.
I think that makes a lot of sense for me as well. And that's maybe a way for you to sort of save yourself in a GPP if Tyrod Taylor, maybe he doesn't have a terrible game, but he has a below average game, but you were able to roll monsters at wide receiver 2 and running back 2 because of the cost savings. And you were able to pair, Odell Beckham Jr. and Julio Jones in your lineup because you went with a minimum salary price guy. And that's probably
my preference.
Right. And a better overall, I guess, projected floor and ceiling with those 2 wide receivers versus Sammy Watkins and the next guy. You might get to a point too where it's so cheap between those 2 that you can't even spend. So you're like, I'm left with $1,500. I can't spend any more.
You need to raise defense prices.
Yeah, exactly. Like, somebody give the Bucs some respect. Their minimum salary. Okay, on to the wide receivers. We've been touching on him here as potential hookups, but let's talk about our top plays here. We obviously we're talking about potential hookups with Tannehill and Matt Ryan and different quarterbacks that we might use here for week 1. What about just individually, maybe as top option standalone or wide receiver 2s? Who piques your interest here from a wide receiver standpoint?
My interest is peaked with Demaryius Thomas as a standalone. You know who he is. He needs no justification. It's a tough matchup with the Ravens, but I do think that he gets the volume and the big play, and I think his skill it makes him a little bit matchup proof. But that might steer some people away, so you get a lower ownership. I also like Brandon Cooks a lot for New Orleans. In this, I won't pair with. I do like Arizona's defense this week as well, because Drew Brees is a little bit more turnover prone on the road and far less effective fantasy-wise. But what offense the Saints do generate, I think, has a great chance of going through Brandon Cooks, at least through the air. So he's a standalone receiver that I like, especially in PPR. And then, the last guy is going to be in every single lineup, and I don't say this very often, but give me 80% ownership on Devontae Adams.
Yeah, I think that we're both in 100% agreement with Devontae Adams. Whether you think it's a good play or a bad play, I think he is a must play, just in terms of blocking and for the cost saving that it's going to open up in your fantasy lineups there. So if you miss with everybody else, and if he hits, then you're in the same spot. And you don't put yourself behind the eight ball if he blows up for a huge game. So right there with what you said, and Jonathan Bales echoed the same sentence there a couple shows ago as well. An obvious play, but also something that you have to have in your lineups overall.
One other, especially on FanDuel, guy that I like a lot is Eddie Royal. With Alshon Jeffrey still not back at practice, I think we know that Eddie Royal can be effective all down the field and in the red zone. So. He's another option that I like, and I think Chicago's going to have to throw a lot to stay in that game. They always do when they play Green Bay. So that's another one.
Yeah, I like that there as well, and I think that might actually open up a couple spots for somebody like Marcus Wilson too, if Alshon Jeffrey goes down. But Eddie Royal would be my clear preference there as well. I want to quickly flip back to Brandon Cooks. I think that he is a great play, and maybe this isn't the guy I'm going to necessarily use. I don't have the intestinal fortitude or the amount of Tums to do it here in week 1, but Brandon Coleman is an interesting guy for me. You get a very good cost savings on him overall, and had a very nice preseason. They're calling him the new Marcus Colston. I don't know what Marcus Colston's supposed to do since he's on the team still. change his name to Brandon Coleman Part 2. I don't know, but a big rangy wide receiver who's a lot younger and has had a very nice preseason, and wasn't necessarily targeted in every game, but all the practice reports and training camp information coming out of the Saints camp says that Brandon Coleman is primed for a pretty good season. So I will be taking a look to see if he becomes viable there early on in the season, in week 2 and week 3, before the cost savings is completely eroded. So that's a guy that I want to talk about. Now let's get into the backs here. We've talked about the wide receivers and the quarterbacks, a couple of guys. I want to quickly mention also in terms of wide receivers there. Your quick take here on Roddy White. I feel like he's been somewhere between disrespected land and forgotten man here in Atlanta. If you're having any shares with Matt Ryan, is there any scenario where Roddy White comes into play, or is it just all Julio all the time?
I think it's all Julio all the time for me.
Okay.
I know.
I feel bad for him.
I do too.
Okay, but I think we're both in agreement there. He's off the radar for me. I don't know him in a single season long league, and my concern too is Roddy or is Julio Jones just matchup proof now, because he should be getting all the double coverage,
when he's healthy.
Yeah, all the defensive attention, and I guess it just hasn't mattered because he was in that same scenario last season, and people are still predicting a breakout overall, which you would think would leave Waddy right wide open a third of the time or something, or in single coverage. But Matt Ryan just he doesn't care. It's like he's not even on the team right now. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Maybe it could have been interesting if you told me it was interesting. Then I would have looked more into it. But
there are other aging wide receivers that I think are in better spots. Andre Johnson, I'm in. I think he has a chance to take the spot that was Dwayne Allen's last season, was the primary red zone target there. With you just saw Dwayne Allen just come up with 3 catches for 30 yards, but he had a score
every time, and he would, rank among the top 6-7 scorers among tight ends just on touchdown, ability alone.
Yeah, he had 8. He only played 8 games, I think.
You're right. Yeah. So I think that's now Andre Johnson's job. He's going to be the big 6'4" wide receiver catching the jump balls in the end zone. So you don't necessarily have to downgrade T.Y. Hilton, but you can sort of use Andre Johnson as a good value play if you like the price there across any of those DFS sites. Okay. As promised, running backs. Let's go ahead and talk about it. We talked about DeMarco Murray. We talked about Adrian Peterson breaking all kinds of records in week 1. Who is going to crack your lineup besides those guys there for week 1?
Chris Ivory is going to be in all my lineups because I love him, and he's so cheap. He's so cheap and so underrated. He's got the starting job. The Jets are going to run the ball. Their passing attack is questionable at best. I know we've seen what Ryan Fitzpatrick can do, and we like to focus on the 6-touchdown game, but he's had a lot of sub-6 touchdown games as well. And I mean, I nothing against Eric Decker or Brandon Marshall either, but I just think that the Jets are going to slow the pace, run the ball. Cleveland is an exploitable run defense, and he's basically free.
Vandal is trying to hand him. You're like, listen, no charge on Chris Ivory this week, okay? If you just want him, put him in. We will refund the salary, and right before lineup lock, you can take the 4,100 that he is on DraftKings and just apply him to somewhere else. Yeah, I like that play there as well. And the other thing that I like the most about Chris Ivory, aside from the matchup and the things that you talked about there, is no significant threat behind him. I'm not concerned about Bilal Powell or who came over. Zach Stacy, I believe it is the third string guy. There's nobody that's like. There's not even like an upstart rookie. Yeah, exactly. It should be 30 plus touches for Chris Ivory for sure. And you know that you can't necessarily trust Fitzmagic to pull out a consistent passing attack. And given what the Browns level of success against the run game, which is next to nil. Now they did make some changes to the defensive line, so you should probably account for that. But that doesn't mean that you should shy away from Chris Ivory, especially given the cost savings. I think he's a perfect RB2 for a lot of your lineups there in week 1, and it'll allow you to go right into that top tier level with the DeMarco Murrays and the C.J. Andersons on above, and give yourself an absolute bell cow in week 1. Any other running backs that I want to actually ask you about a Twitter question. There was a Twitter question about Dion Lewis and I believe Benny Cunningham, who may end up starting for Trey Mason if Trey Mason can't get healthy for week 1. So the question actually comes from at Robert D. Isert. Are Benny Cunningham and Dion Lewis viable cheap options for week 1 GPPs?
To me, that this is punting in the true sense of the word, where you really can't expect anything good to come of it for your lineup. No, for me, they're not viable plays. I don't think that. I think there are other players that have more skill that are going to have more opportunities, and maybe not as cheap as those guys, but no. So what they play? They play Seattle.
Are we talking about Dion Lewis or are we talking about Benny Cunningham?
Benny Cunningham.
Yeah, Benny Cunningham.
We'll
Okay.
really see something from Cunningham, but that's not. I mean, you're taking a player that hasn't been that impressive and putting him in one of the toughest situations. I don't know. I have no interest in either.
Okay, I'm with you on Benny Cunningham. First of all, we need to know for sure that if he's actually going to start, and we're not going to know that until 5 days from now. But having said that, I am sort of interested, I will admit, about Dion Lewis here in week 1, since Mike Clay tweeted out that he won the third down running back job there. So if Shane Vereen was ever a viable option, and I'm not saying that he was for me in DFS, he wasn't last season. But if you take a look at what's happening here for New England here in week 1, no LeGarrette Blount. They cut Jonas Gray. I don't know who else is supposed to run the ball aside from Dion Lewis on this roster. They have James White, so I mean, I guess James White could potentially be the early down carry back. And you know that Dion Lewis, given his size, Brandon Bolden, yeah, he could be actually Brandon Bolden is probably a more likely candidate to be an early down guy over James White. But I guess from a third down back roll, he could be potentially interesting there. But and he's minimum salary. So just to sort of play devil's advocate here, you only need about 10 points from Dion Lewis to pay off a $3K salary for a minimum. So if you want to take a shot and you think that you need, for some reason, you need a 3K player because you love everybody else in your lineup, I'm not gonna be opposed to Dion Lewis. He's just not going to be a guy that cracks my lineups there. So there is some potential.
You're saying he's going to catch 3 passes from behind the line of scrimmage and run for 70 yards? I mean, how's he getting to those 10 points? I don't see it.
Well, what do you need, like 4 catches for 50 yards and 30 or 45 yards rushing? Maybe I'm being overly optimistic. I don't know. I'm just trying to help this guy. Sorry, Robert. I was trying to be on your side here.
This is it could happen territory, and okay. I don't play DFS there. It's just
okay. All right, fair enough.
People do,
right,
for
Robert.
Sure. It's not me.
Renee overruled me. Okay, so I'm taking back everything I just said. Just rewind the last 2 minutes of this podcast if you're listening on audio. And Renee said no, and she twisted my arm. So I'm going with what she said.
We need a hammer sound effect.
Boom, gavel. People's court have spoken. All right, Twitter question from Philip Galvin, who's on Twitter at Philsgood with 3 O's. Thoughts on starting Kirk Cousins or Derek Carr for FanDuel GPPs?
I prefer Derek Carr over Cousins. I do think the Miami defense is pretty sound. Mm-hmm. I don't like that matchup as much, and I am fairly confident that Oakland's going to continue to try to run as many plays and as many passing plays as they did last year with some better support around them.
Sure.
I'm fine with that. Actually, one of the tight ends that I wrote about a little bit this week was Mikel Rivera, and how Amari Cooper's getting all the attention, but Rivera had a lot of targets last year. He had like 90 some targets or something last year. He was a bigger part of that offense than we remember. And if Derek Carr's going to get better, then Rivera should get better too.
I remember there was a good 3-4 week stretch where he was actually a top 5 option at tight end, especially off the waiver wire there for standard leagues there. And he made a good cost savings play because he was never priced in the top 10 among tight ends in that stretch on FanDuel or DraftKings there as well. And you factor in full-time Latavius Murray, legit option on the outside with Amari Cooper, and whatever you think Michael Crabtree is worth. Maybe he's worth something. Maybe he's exactly what James Jones was last year. It has to be a better situation in year 2 overall. I'm probably not going to have too many shares of Derek Carr overall, but I have no problem pairing Derek Carr with Amari Cooper. And probably you could actually use Amari Cooper, given the price, as your wide receiver 2 and still come up with a top level wide receiver 1 with the cost savings you get in that pair if you want to keep the hookup together, which is not necessarily what you have to do, as you explained earlier in the show. All right, so we've actually touched on some tight ends here. Do you want to talk about recommended tight end plays here for week 1?
Well, a couple that stand out to me. Owen Daniels is priced really cheap. He's Peyton Manning's tight end in a that offense. So to me, he's a solid tight end option. I think a fairly safe cash game play. I think Richard Rodgers is an interesting play. Started to develop some rapport with Aaron Rodgers at the end of last season as a rookie. Continues to be, I think, a good red zone target for Aaron Rodgers. And, without Jordy Nelson, a lot of targets are going to be up for grabs. And I think someone like Richard Rodgers makes a little bit more sense than a Ty Montgomery or James Jones if he sees the field. I'd have a little bit more trust in Richard Rodgers.
For me, I think I actually are going to try to find a way, at least in some of my GPPs, to get Greg Olsen into my lineups here for week 1. I think he's the most trustworthy option out there in Carolina, and we've seen multiple games where he pulled out 10 plus targets there from Cam Newton. I think he's going to be the security blanket and the red zone threat that's available. A lot of people like Devin Funchess there, but he's still a rookie, and I still want to see it before I put him into any of my lineups there. So I think Greg Olsen is a safe of a tight end play that you can come with. Obviously, you're going to have to pay up for him. He's the third price tight end there on DraftKings, for example, at 5,300. Take a look at FanDuel for tight ends there as well. You get a little bit more of a discount on him. He's see here, the number 5 price tight end there. So if you flip over to FanDuel, I guess from a cost saving standpoint, it looks like you can afford him a little bit better on that site there. But in as many lineups as I can possibly can, if I get the appropriate cost savings, Greg Olsen above even somebody like Jimmy Graham, I think is going to be my top target for tight ends. We're going to skip over kickers there because we sort of covered that there, and we're gonna let you be your own. You're gonna be a big boy and a big girl there, and pick your own kicker. There, best of luck to you guys. And let's talk about defenses here. We've got some top level options that are top priced, and some interesting low cost options there as well. Can I interest you in a Chicago defense for minimum salary against Aaron Rodgers in Week 1?
No, you can sell me Buffalo against Andrew Luck.
Okay, I'll take that. All right, that's a little bit more interesting and enticing here. Let's talk about this seriously though. Some recommended plays for defense here for Week 1.
I do like Buffalo. They're recommended by me. Andrew Luck turns the ball over a lot. Maybe they get a little bit more ball security from Frank Gore than they had last year, but this is a team that I think was second or third in turnovers last year, and Buffalo is one of the league's best defenses, and the game is in Buffalo, which is a factor that we can't say for a lot of the other good defenses that are playing this week. And they're not the highest price. They're maybe top third, but they're affordable in my opinion. I already mentioned the Bengals against Oakland, and we just said all kinds of nice things about Mari Cooper and Derek Carr and Rivera and Latavius Murray, but this is a very young team, and I think if they continue to play at a high pace, they're going to continue to make mistakes at a reasonably high rate, and the Bengals could take advantage of that. They also have a favorable ratio giveaway takeaway. And I also already mentioned Arizona. Those are the 3 that I'm kind of zeroed in on right now in terms of DFS, all sites.
All right, sounds good to me. To me, I think Green Bay and Houston are going to be the 2 that interest me the most overall. I don't have a lot of faith in Jay Cutler as a quarterback. Even though that he is at home, I think that the Green Bay defense is pretty opportunistic, and I like what they have up front with Clay Matthews and Julius Peppers as bookends for that defense. If you factor in that they have no Kevin White, maybe no Alshon Jeffrey. Alshon Jeffrey doesn't necessarily play at 100%. You're asking Jay Cutler and Matt Forte to shoulder a lot of that load. And I think there's going to be some turnover opportunity, and that's what as you mentioned, what you're looking for from your defense, to take interceptions and fumbles and take them to the house. So I think there's some good opportunity there. And I don't know how you cannot consider J.J. Watt pretty much any week as maybe one of the best players overall, that you don't even get to play by name in defense. They should change the Houston defense to the J.J. Watt defense featuring 10 other Houston guys. So
it's a little wordy, but
right. Yeah, Yahoo or FanDuel will have to expand the screen or go 2 lines. Right. But JJ Watt is a human turnover on the defensive end, and we've seen him catch interceptions, strip sacks, take balls to the house. There are a lot of, and you give him a full season of Jadeveon Clowney, and let's see what happens. I'm not overly impressed by Kansas City's ability to put up numbers on offense. Alex Smith still needs to show me he can throw a pass over 10 yards. I do like to.
By the way.
Okay.
I think he will show you that.
Okay.
I have some faith this year.
All right. Well, I do like the fact that they've added Jeremy Maclin and that he looked like they were pretty well in sync this season. I hated the way that Andy Reid ran Jamal Charles out last year with so many 13 carry games and 17 touches overall when they absolutely dominated teams in the screen game, and then for some reason or another just absolutely went away from that there in 2014. So I have a little bit of concerns about the scheme. I do like Travis Kelce. Obviously, Jeremy Maclin's an upgrade. I don't know if that's enough of an upgrade for me to steer me away from Houston in week 1. I want to see what they got, and we're talking about mid-tier prices here, right? With Buffalo, $4,500 for Houston, Green Bay, and Buffalo. So we gave you 3, and you can choose between which ones you like the best out of that group.
I think that when you were talking about Chicago, it reminded me Martellus Bennett is another tight end that I'm high on this week. Just given the lack of other options and the stable presence he's been and the chemistry he's had with Jake Butler throughout their careers.
Mm-hmm. And I think I heard Smizzle mention that they're on the Fantasy Focus Football podcast there as well. So I think there's a lot of credence to that, especially if you're going to get an Alshon Jeffrey that's out or an Alshon Jeffrey that's not at 100%. Good security blanket, good like in that same mold. Maybe I don't know if I like him as much as Greg Olsen because there really is no one. But Philly Brown, I guess, and Devin Funchess there. So I think I would give the leg up to Greg Olsen. But Martellus Bennett I think is also in a really good spot, particularly if there's no Alshon Jeffrey there in the week. My only concern is like how soon we see Jimmy Clausen if the game gets out of hand, and then we don't know if Jimmy Clausen is going to get targets or if Martellus Bennett's going to play in the fourth quarter. That's my main concern about Bears. It's like, are they going to be sitting? Is it going to be 41-10 like early in the fourth?
Smoking on the bench.
Yeah, Matt Forte has got the long jacket on with Gatorade, and we're like, oh man. We got 50 yards out of Matt Forte. That's why I can't play the Bears really this week. I'm afraid of the blowout. All right, maybe I shouldn't be. All right, that is going to do it for today's show. Best of luck to you, all of you guys, in your week 1 matchups. There, don't forget you can follow Renee on Twitter at Renee Miller01. You can tell me about all my bad picks here on this show at Josh Hayes FS on Twitter, and don't forget that the Pro Football Focus and the Daily Slant is brought to you by DraftKings.com, America's favorite one-week fantasy football site. And you can subscribe to PFF Radio on iTunes. You can listen on Stitcher, Blog Talk Radio, and you can watch the show right here on the official YouTube channel for PFF and the Fantasy Sports Network. For my co-host, Renee Miller, I'm Josh Hayes, and we'll see you back here next week.